How bad do things need to be for the Ottawa Chief Police to go public about his own issue? When I saw this, I was absolutely speechless. Based on how nuts things are on a daily basis, it takes a lot for me to be speechless. Mark Carney has turned Canada into a bailout Ponzi scheme. I rested on this for a few days because I was so furious I needed to decompress a little, but now I'm ready to expose this insanity. And even liberal voters and supporters are looking at this. I did not vote for this. And Mark Carney was caught doing some bizarre things, which has the internet going in a frenzy. I got lots more for you today. Let's get into this report. Here's the police chief, Eric Stubbs of the Ottawa Police Services. I don't need to explain this any further. Let's just take a look.
It has to shift quickly in the other direction.
The chief outlining several examples, including officers allegedly using police databases to obtain information about women they encounter in public.
Externally, members are using our databases as their own way to meet women. Seeing a woman at a coffee shop, coming out of a gym, driving next to them, getting their license plates and running them on the system. We've seen members messaging vulnerable victims on calls that they've attended in an attempt to develop an intimate relationship.
The comments follow several recent incidents involving Ottawa police members, including an officer charged in an intimate partner violence investigation and another demoted for improperly accessing police databases.
This is a coordinated, systematic targeting of women. It's really predatory and it is extremely dangerous.
I don't know how bad things need to be for the police chief to come out and go public about his own problems. I want you to think about this. These police officers are able to look up your private information and history and find out information about you. And it's such a big problem. It's happening throughout the force that the police chief needs to come out and provide a warning. And now that we found out that the police is going into their data sets, which they're not allowed to do, breaking the law, we have Bill C-22, which makes George Orwell's 1984 book look like child's play.
How could the human spirit ever flourish in the utter absence of basic privacy? Even at a much younger age, I knew that it was basically wrong for my sister to go through the things in my room or for me to read her diary. Not because any authority figure ever told me it was wrong. I knew it in my soul. One can't develop one's thoughts, one's feelings, one's self under prying eyes. And that was just respect to my friends and family. What if a power as great as the government or the police violated your privacy? I knew that my mother and her family had escaped a communist regime in the 1960s, but back then telescreens were science fiction. Could my family have managed to plan their escape if a telescreen was in their home? I have a phone in my pocket and an Apple Watch on my wrist. I am most horrified because with the legislation before us, the Liberal government is attempting to make possible the 1984 telescreen out of every cell phone, AirPod, Apple Watch, smart TV, and automobile. Anything that is connected to the internet. To quote the excerpt from 1984 again, there was of course no way of knowing whether you were being watched at any given moment. I know that the members opposite will consider my views outlandish, but they are not. Let me please take them through their own law to show them how they are doing the exact thing they swear they would never do. Section 52A. The Governor and Council, that means the government, may make regulations respecting the obligations of core providers, including the development, implementation, assessment, testing, and maintenance of operational and technical capabilities, including capabilities related to extracting and organizing information that is authorized to be accessed. In plain English, this means a back door. So right now, it is my understanding that my watch listens to everything I say. If I say, "Hey Siri," it sends whatever speech follows to the cloud for processing. If I don't say, "Hey Siri," nothing goes to the cloud. Section 52A allows the minister to require that Apple build in the ability for authorities to listen to my Apple Watch, whether I say, "Hey Siri," or not. The same would go for my phone and my AirPods. Yes, they would need a warrant to actually listen in, but this bill takes the huge first step of building the surveillance architecture in the first place. Once it is built, it will be ripe for abuse either by the government or by hackers. Once it is built, it will not be unbuilt. We are at the stage where the government builds all the telescreens and puts them in your home, but promises to only use them if you've been bad. What is worse, Mr. Speaker, this bill, as pertains to electronic service providers under Section 7, such as Apple, Signal, Telegram, or Tinder, may be forced to keep that backdoor secret. Section 15. An electronic service provider and any person acting on its behalf must not disclose any of the following information. C. The fact that the electronic service provider is subject to the order. In plain English, this section sets out that the government the fact that the government has ordered construction of a backdoor to be kept secret. So once this bill passes, your cell phone manufacturer, your messaging service, your dating app may receive a secret order to build a backdoor into the surface for the government to check in on you, and you might never be alerted.
Once this data and information has been collected on every single Canadian, they could go back an entire year and look at every single conversation you've ever had. If you had a cell phone, a watch, or any kind of electronic attached to the internet. And now we found out the police services are going in and looking at information they're not allowed to look at. And this is rampant in the police services. That's why the chief is raising the alarm on this. It's happening throughout the police force. That's why he made a video. And we're going to do a Bill C-22. Imagine all of your data and private conversations being recorded, and the police services could listen to your conversations or your text messages or any kind of communication you've made a year ago, because these police officers were looking for an easy victim or a date. Imagine they see that you're fighting with your partner and then they just came swooping on in because they've read every single one of your text messages thanks to Bill C-22. If we already have problems with the current laws and what's happening within Canada, then you're going to add Bill C-22, collect everybody's information. Don't you want to get the police under control first? Just a thought. Remember, Mark Carney sold himself as an economic genius, the only guy that could turn things around for our Canadian economy? This year alone, there's only 1 month that our inflation rate was below 2%, but every other month since then, and look, the trend is straight up. Hopefully everybody had a wonderful Father's Day weekend, but not everybody was happy about Father's Day. There is a group that is currently pushing to cancel Father's Day to promote an all-inclusive Parents' Day. We need to eliminate Father's Day altogether. I don't know about you, but I think they've taken this way too far. The Toronto Star wanted a piece of the action because they are one of the wokest papers out there, says the Modest Opinion proposal, why it's time to abolish Father's Day. If you thought canceling Father's Day was completely wacko, check this out. Canadian town officially recognized trees as living beings with rights. Human rights for trees. A Quebec town. Why are Quebec so woke and so left-leaning? Because you wouldn't see this from the right, because this is a complete detachment of common sense. How could you give a tree that doesn't have a heart? You need a heart. There's no heart in a tree. As the National Post here says, Quebec's town officially recognizes trees as sentient living beings with their own rights. And I agree with Max Alexander. Another Canadian jurisdiction is granting human rights to nature. They give rights away freely while stripping away them from citizens. Isn't that the truth? The deconstruction is nearly complete. Every single Canadian needs to check on their elbows up liberal supporters. Mark Carney, after telling us for an entire year, buy Canadian, we're going to be our own best customer. We just found out that he waived the buy Canadian rule. Why? Why would he do this? Why would he do this? Administrative burden. You can't make any of this stuff up. It's just too hard. For an economic genius, it's just way too hard. Luckily, Canadians didn't follow Mark Carney's orders. Month after month, Canadians stopped going down to the United States. But now, oh man, life is so unaffordable in Canada that people are starting to cross the border. And get this, the Canadian Northern Peso is in free fall right now. It's dropped 2 cents in a month, and that is a significant drop in just a month. Normally 2 cents would be a year and a half, 2 years. 2 cents in a month is significant. We're about to break that 70 cents, which is a psychological barrier. Once we get into the 60s, timber the Canadian Northern Peso. But it doesn't matter. Canadians are flocking across the border for cheaper gas, and they have cheaper food as well. We are paying so much money for our food. People are crossing the border to save a couple dollars.
Canada deals with the trade war with the United States amidst the uncertainty with CUSMA. We're getting some very interesting data this morning about cross-border travel. Let's now bring in CTV's Annie Bergeron all over in Ottawa with more. Good morning, Annie. So tell us about cross-border trips by Canadians.
Hi, Akshay. Well, Stats Canada does keep track on where Canadians are traveling and who's coming to Canada. And this data today is fairly interesting. For 15 months, Statistics Canada had shown a trend that Canadians were largely skipping trips to the United States. Their elbows were up and they were shunning U.S. travel in a boycott. But that trend seems to be reversed. New data that's out today from Statistics Canada shows that for the very first time since January 2025, more Canadians are actually traveling to the United States, an increase of 1.8%. Now, 1.8% increase doesn't seem that significant, but that's still a lot of people who are traveling to the United States, especially in comparison to before. This data was for April, but back in March, we actually saw a decline of about 6% of people who were traveling to the United States. So clearly more Canadians are choosing to go to the U.S. What's interesting here is if you look in the data, there were 2.4 million trips south of the border in April. That's, again, a 1.8% increase compared to the year before. And that was largely driven by trips by automobiles. There was an 8% increase in the number of Canadians who were traveling to the U.S. by auto. And 65% of those trips were same-day trips. So that means that a lot more Canadians are choosing to get into their car to cross the border for same-day travel. That's something that had been on the decline. And it's interesting as well because the Canadian dollar right now was only around 70 cents. So we do have a weak dollar, and yet more Canadians are choosing to cross the border for these quick trips. Now, we talk a lot about airline travel.
Why would people cross the border for a quick trip? It's to fill up their gas tank, buy some cheaper milk and cheese and whatever else they could get at a discount, because food prices in Canada are astronomical. If you could save a little bit of money, you're going to be driving down to the United States for that day trip.
And how expensive it is to travel by airline lately, especially because of high fuel and energy prices, that actually has decreased by 7.1%. So fewer Canadians are choosing to travel by air, instead hopping in their car, going over for short trips to the United States. Now, one final point here that is interesting is that if you look at April 2024 compared to April 2026, there is still quite a substantial difference. 26% decline April 2026 compared to April 2024. So clearly not as many Canadians are traveling now as they did 2 years ago, but still for the first time since January 2025, we are seeing that more Canadians are now choosing to go south of the border.
Very interesting indeed. But a quick check on, does Stats Canada share with us why this reversal of sorts, even though it's tiny, but why?
Yeah, they don't really have any data about why. They're just saying that more Canadians are.
How dumb do you have to be not to know why? Why? The reason they don't want to tell you why is because they don't want to reveal the truth. Canadians are desperate. Affordability is the worst, the absolute worst it's ever been in Canadian history. Mark Carney thinks it's the absolute best affordability it's ever been. We are all rich in this country, but the data speaks for itself. people are flocking over the border to save $20 to fill up on their gasoline.
For doing it. And interestingly, you do have to point out that this is for April. It is when the weather starts to get warm. People start to travel in the spring and summer. And so the data also shows that more Canadians are traveling in general. So while there are more Canadians traveling abroad, there are also more people going to the United States, but they don't provide any type of breakdown about why. Perhaps it has to do with political tensions. Maybe Canadians believe that those tensions have eased. Maybe it's because of the high cost of airline travel, which we talked so much about recently, especially that we're seeing a lot of these numbers are traveling by car, even though gasoline is more expensive these days. We talked yesterday, a 33% increase year over year. It is cheaper to hop in your car and go south of the border. Maybe, you're in a border town like Windsor, you go to Detroit or someplace for the weekend. It's cheaper to do that than it is to hop on a plane and go someplace else. So
are they listening to themselves? They just said that same-day travel is up significantly. So all of the stuff that she's just been describing makes zero sense. They're not going on vacation. They're crossing the border. But do you see how they're trying to do narrative control throughout this entire segment?
Not really sure why. Hopefully we'll be able to talk to some experts and travel experts in the next little bit. But this just came out at 8:30. So it's definitely an interesting reversal that we're starting.
I'm going to tell you right now what they're going to do. They're going to try to get some of these liberal experts to tell us why. Moving along to my other top story. The bailouts are out of control in Canada, and the mainstream media is working overtime trying to justify Mark Carney and the Liberals. 5 reasons why bailing out rich Vancouver condo developers with taxpayer money is what the free market is all about. By Mark Carney. Is this for real? The free market would not do this. I had to sit on this story because I was so upset. If you hold a mortgage in Canada and you decide that you are unable to pay it, you will go bankrupt. If you invested in the stock market and the stock market plummeted, you would get financially ruined. But if you are a rich developer in Vancouver with ties to China, that's right, with ties to China, and I'm going to show you proof. Mark Carney's going to come. You're going to make billions of dollars on the way up during a liberal real estate boom, which priced out all of the younger Canadians. Then, instead of allowing the prices to come down, you're going to come in and spend my money, your money, everybody's money. You're going to increase taxes and inflation on us to bail out the Chinese and rich liberal insider developers with our own money. I mean, I cannot believe that there's not tens of thousands of people that have flooding the streets across Canada, including in Vancouver, that's getting bailed out, because this is the most insane thing I've ever seen. What happened to the free market? What they've created is a printing press, and we are all going to get decimated.
Metro Vancouver alone, around 2,500 finished units are standing vacant with no buyers. With higher interest rates, weaker investment demand, developers are stuck. They don't want to sell at a loss. They can't afford to hold those empty units indefinitely.
They don't want to sell at a loss. Maybe they should have done a better business plan and thought, hey, I'm not going to be so greedy. I'm going to slow things down. But instead, they could lower the price so people could actually afford to purchase one of these things. Just a thought.
We will convert vacant condos into affordable housing. Condos that have been built, that are unoccupied, that are going to sit there potentially for another couple of years. We're going to go use the right financing mechanisms, convert.
Instead of allowing Canadians to have home ownership, they're going to come and use our own money and then rent it back to people. Do you see what this is? This is the you will own nothing and be happy model. Remember how I said I have proof about the Chinese tie bailing out these developers? Here we have Sam Cooper, and check it out, 178,000 views. And Mark Cahodes in an interview, and I have a clip for you. Let's check this out. Oh, and by the way, moral hazards on steroids. The investor who called The Big Short says that Carney's condo bailout is worse than the 2008 subprime fiasco.
Gregor Robertson, who was dating a Chinese spy, whose mother of the Chinese spy ended up going to prison in China. So that was the scandal back then. He's now the federal housing minister, and Carney is basically putting the losses to the Canadian taxpayers of these condos, which are built and can't sell. And he's bailing out the CCP backed developers, you know, the condo king, Rennie, and all his buddies. And Sam and I talked about this 2014, so it's a dozen years ago. And they were bragging. On one hand, they were bragging how great the Vancouver housing market was because it doubled in price. And now people got over their skis building, they're all bankrupt. And instead of blowing these things out and letting the market clear at the fair price, which is what Sam and I have been arguing for a dozen years, drag Eby into the mix. We'll get into him later. And now they want to bail out these developers on the backs of the Canadian taxpayers at prices which are artificial, to create and support an artificial market. And the only one who benefits from the artificial market are the CCP backed developers in Vancouver, because this makes no economic sense. The housing market in BC has completely stalled, is inside out. So, and if you believe in capitalism and a free market economy, which I guess Arctic Mexico believes in because they're in the G7, this goes completely against everything that you would believe in. And the crazy thing is, say what you want about Sam and I, we're sure not conspiracy theorists. This plays right into everything we've said. I mean, this is a lock, stock, and barrel slam dunk of everything we've talked about, especially Sam, in the last dozen years. And it's sick and it's insane. And it's amazing, frankly, that Carney and Gregor can go with a straight face and talk about this and just not describe it for exactly what it is. So it's amazing there aren't riots in the streets with everything that's going on up there.
I
People
agree.
can barely afford to eat. And instead of the government helping the people out, they're bailing out the CCP, who Carney cut back side door deals with. So it's absolute. It's insane.
I cannot believe there are no riots on the street. Maybe people are ill-informed. Maybe Mark Carney's really good at covering this whole thing up. We need to call it for what it is. We are all paying for Mark Carney and his buddies to get bailed out. My last item that I'm going to cover is Mark Carney's doing some very strange things. And this thing is going parabolic on the internet because people are like, this is the guy that's going to get us out of a recession. Well, he also caused the recession. He's supposed to get us out of the recession. And he's doing bizarre things like this. That's it for today's report. The police chief coming out saying there are many police officers looking up private citizens' information in order to gain access to information so they could get a date or potentially pry on some vulnerable women. And at the same time that this is happening, the Liberals have rammed through Bill C-22, which is going to allow them to collect all of our information and store it for an entire year and have police that is completely out of control have access to every single conversation we've ever had. You can't make any of this stuff up, Canada. And then we have Quebec which wants to give human rights to nature and trees. While at the same time, we have Mark Carney bailing out his CCP friends and developers in Vancouver instead of allowing the prices to come down so that our Canadian youth could be able to afford real estate again. They're the ones that cause prices to go parabolic, and now they're cashing out their friends. Can you believe it, Canada? I wish I had better news today, but it is what it is, and I want to make sure that you are well informed. Love to hear from you in the comments section. I'll see you on the next report.